I want you to close your eyes for a second. I mean, really try to picture this. I want to transport you directly into a very specific physical space.
Oh, I love starting like this. It really sets the stage.
Right. Okay, so imagine you are standing in the dead center of a massive, perfectly flat, open plaza.
And when we say massive, you really need to recalibrate your sense of ancient scale here.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking 50 acres of completely leveled earth. I mean, that is roughly the size of, 38 American football fields.
Just placed side by side, it's staggering.
It really is. So you're standing there, take a slow breath in, the air around you is thick.
And it hangs really heavy with that distinct, sweet smell of hickory and oak wood smoke.
And the ambient noise is just deafening. You hear dogs barking, the rhythmic thud of stone tools, thousands of voices echoing all around you.
Right, and as you look around this vast plaza, stretching out in every direction to the horizon,
Yeah.
you see thousands upon thousands of houses.
But they aren't just like random huts, right?
No, not at all. They are sturdy, tightly woven walls with steeply pitched, thatched roofs. And they're neatly organized into a deliberate grid of bustling neighborhoods.
It's a real city. And then you turn your gaze to the north end of the plaza.
Yeah, you look north, and right at the northern edge of this vast clearing looming over the entire landscape is a mountain.
But as your eyes adjust to it, you realize it is not made of rock. It has no natural crags or ridges.
Exactly. It is a 100-foot tall, geometrically perfect, flat-topped mountain made entirely of packed earth.
Made entirely by hand. And sitting right on the very summit, literally touching the sky, is a massive, sprawling wooden temple structure.
You are standing in the shadow of an awe-inspiring, dominant skyline that was engineered completely by human hands.
It is a profound projection of physical and spiritual power.
It really is. What you are standing in is essentially a masterclass in urban engineering. It is a monumental, terraformed landscape that commands total obedience from the senses.
Now, here is where this gets completely paradigm shifting. When you picture a scene like that, a highly organized grid, tens of thousands of people, monumental architecture, your mind probably jumps straight to the ancient Near East.
Oh, sure. You might be picturing the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia.
Right. Or maybe early dynastic Egypt along the banks of the Nile. Or perhaps a great Mayan metropolis hidden deep in the jungles of Central America.
But no.
No, the place you're standing in, the city you're looking at, is North America.
Yep. You are standing just across the river from modern-day St. Louis, Missouri.
And the year's around 1100 CE, 1,000 years ago.
To put that timeline into a global perspective for you, at this exact moment in 1100 CE, the city you were describing is larger, more densely populated, and arguably more centrally planned than contemporary London.
Wait, bigger than London?
Oh, absolutely. While medieval London was, frankly, a cramped, muddy warren of winding streets still recovering from the Norman conquest, this city was a mathematically organized grid radiating outward from monumental architecture.
It registers as almost unbelievable. It completely blows my mind every single time I look at these sources.
It's an incredible piece of history that so many people just don't know about.
This is Cahokia, a bustling, incredibly complex metropolis planted right in the middle of the American Midwest.
And no city in what would eventually become the United States would surpass this place in sheer size or scale until Philadelphia in the 1780s.
7 entire centuries later. I mean, that is just wow. But the awe, the staggering scale of this architectural achievement is just the hook.
Right, because the real story is a bit more complicated.
Exactly, because as magnificent as this city is, when you zoom out on the map and look at where they decided to build this metropolis, you are hit with this incredibly uncomfortable geographical reality.
Uncomfortable is putting it mildly, honestly.
Yeah.
The location is the central animating mystery of everything we are looking at today in this deep dive. Because this magnificent towering city wasn't built on a high, defensible plateau.
Right, it wasn't built on solid bedrock either.
No, it was built directly on what geologists and locals call the American bottom.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the American bottom is a floodplain. It is a low, wet, geographically vulnerable floodplain of the massive Mississippi River.
And this creates a terrifying paradox for anyone trying to live there.
Because the very same river that lays down the rich silt that grows the crops, the river that literally gives them life, is the exact same river that periodically violently rises up and swallows the land whole.
which is why the stack of sources we have in front of us today is so utterly fascinating.
We've got a lot to get through.
We do. We are pulling from a mountain of archaeological site records, geological data, and a brilliant, highly specific geoscience paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS.
And our mission for this depth dive is to synthesize all of this, to explore one of the most incredible archaeological puzzles on the North American continent.
We are basically looking at a metropolis defined by a massive high-stakes tension.
A tension between human engineering on an unprecedented scale and a merciful but ultimately temporary window of climate.
So let's really get into the underlying question here, because it's staggering. What kind of people decide to plant the largest city on the North American continent right in the dead center of a flood basin?
Right. A place where a single poorly timed week of bad weather could literally erase your entire society's ability to feed itself.
And more importantly, how in the world did they manage to get away with it?
How did they thrive and expand, building monuments to last millennia in a bowl waiting for water for 300 years?
It is the ultimate paradox of Cahokia. To even begin to understand the city, to understand the minds of the people who built it, you first have to understand the dirt it sits on.
You have to understand the mechanics of the American bottom.
Right. Because before there were 100-foot pyramids of earth, before there were massive 50-acre plazas, there was just the river and the mud.
Just mud. So let's look at the geography. The American bottom is a broad, incredibly flat stretch of the Mississippi River floodplain.
It sits on the river's eastern side, stretching south from where the Missouri River violently crashes into the Mississippi.
And because of the way those two massive river systems meet, it is some of the most phenomenally fertile soil on the entire continent.
But that fertility is not a static resource.
Yeah.
It's an active biological process, and it comes with a lethal catch.
The soil is constantly renewed, constantly enriched by the exact same mechanism that makes the land so incredibly dangerous to inhabit.
Well, you're talking about the floods.
The floods. We need to understand how a floodplain works mechanically for a second.
Sure. So when the Mississippi River overspills its banks, it expands outward over that flat basin.
And as the water spreads out, it loses its velocity. It slows down.
Right. And as the water slows, it can no longer carry the heavy suspended sediments it has been churning up from hundreds of miles upstream.
So it drops them.
Exactly. It deposits a fresh layer of highly nutritious, mineral-rich silt all over the entire floodplain.
It is basically nature's ultimate self-replenishing fertilizer.
It is.
If I'm thinking about this from a historical perspective, it makes me think of an ancient farmer along the Nile or the Ganges.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Intellectually, that the river is a sleeping monster. It could wake up, burst its banks, and destroy every single thing you have built. Your home, your tools, your life.
But you accept the risk.
You play the odds because the ground literally pays you in corn.
The agricultural yield is just too astronomical to ignore. You can grow a massive surplus of food there that you simply couldn't grow up on the rocky bluffs.
And that concept, the agricultural surplus, is the absolute prerequisite for building a city.
You cannot have thousands of people doing specialized labor if everyone is farming all day long.
Right. You can't have engineers designing 100-foot mounds, or artisans crafting intricate shell jewelry, or priests observing the complex movements of the stars.
Or leaders running a government.
Exactly. Not if every single one of those people has to spend all day foraging or planting just to survive the winter. You need a massive agricultural engine that produces calories far beyond what the farmers themselves consume.
And for the Mississippian culture, which is the broader cultural umbrella that built Cahokia, that engine was a very specific trio of plants.
We're talking about a maize, beans, and squash surplus economy, the Three Sisters.
Yes, and we shouldn't treat the Three Sisters just as a cute vocabulary word. It is a brilliantly synergistic biological engine.
How so?
Well, the maize, or corn, provides a tall stalk. The beans use that stalk to climb toward the sun, and critically, beans are legumes. They fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, fertilizing the heavy-feeding corn.
Oh, wow. So they feed each other.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the broad prickly leaves of the squash plant cover the ground below, acting as a living mulch that shades out weeds and retains soil moisture during the hot Midwest summers.
It's brilliant.
Together, they provide a nearly complete nutritional profile, including complex carbohydrates and essential amino acids.
It's an absolute nutritional powerhouse. It's the rocket fuel that allowed human populations to explode in this region. But here is the terrifying flip side of that coin. The danger of building your society in a flood basin isn't just about a flood washing away the corn stalks while they're growing in the field.
No, it goes so much deeper than that.
Let's really look at the mathematical terror of this situation for the listener. We are talking about a subsistence economy.
And in a subsistence economy, a flood is not an inconvenience.
Hmm.
Losing your stored surplus to water is an existential catastrophe.
If we connect this to the broader reality of ancient survival, we have to look at the cascading nature of the risk.
Let's say a flood comes at the wrong time, like midsummer, and ruins a single season's crop in the field. That is a hardship. People will go hungry.
Sure.
But human societies are resilient. They can sometimes weather a single bad season by relying on stored reserves from the previous year, by intense foraging in the surrounding forests, or through trade with neighboring groups.
Right. A bad harvest is a crisis, but it's not necessarily the end of the world.
But the true terror, the absolute nightmare scenario that would have kept the leaders of Cahokia awake at night, is if the floodwaters breach their storage facilities.
Oh, no.
If the river rises high enough to take the stored seed stock, the carefully selected, dried, and preserved kernels of corn that are explicitly meant to be planted the next spring, that doesn't just ruin the current season.
It forecloses the next season entirely.
Yes.
It breaks the cycle. Because if you eat your seed stock, or if the river rots it, what do you plant in May?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Exactly. Without seed stock, there is no next harvest. Starvation ceases to be just a possibility. It becomes a mathematical certainty for tens of thousands of people.
The entire foundation of the civilization crumbles. There is no backup plan when 20,000 people have no seed to plant.
So knowing that, I have to push back here on the logic of these ancient leaders.
Yeah, please do.
I mean, it makes total sense for a small, agile farming village to take that risk. If you have a few dozen families, they plant their crops in the rich mud of the American bottom.
And if they see the river starting to rise dangerously, they just pack up their most valuable possessions, they grab their leather bags full of seed corn, and they hike a few miles up into the high limestone bluffs surrounding the valley until the water goes down.
Right. That is a highly rational, calculated risk.
But to plant a massive, permanent capital city there, to build 100-foot-tall earthworks and 50-acre plazas that you literally cannot pick up and move?
That seems like an insane gamble.
Well, to lock your entire civilization's infrastructure into a topographic bowl that, historically acts as a bathtub for the Mississippi River, why on earth would they do it?
Your skepticism is entirely valid, and honestly, it mirrors the exact questions archaeologists and geologists have grappled with for decades.
It really does seem like a profoundly reckless gamble against nature.
It does. And to understand why they took it, and how it wasn't just a sprawling, accidental accumulation of people, but a highly calculated act of political will, we have to look at the timeline.
Specifically, we have to look at a singular moment around 1050 CE that archaeologists refer to as the Big Bang of Cahokia.
The Big Bang. I love that term because it immediately strips away the idea of slow, organic growth.
Right. It's not like Cahokia was just a small village that slowly, gradually added a new street every decade for 1,000 years.
Far from it. Let's trace the chronology to see how sudden this really was. We know from the archaeological record that maize agriculture really takes a firm, dominant hold in this specific region around 900 CE.
People are figuring out how to farm the American bottom efficiently with the Three Sisters.
And as food increases, the regional population begins to steadily climb. We see early, smaller-scale mound building starting around this time. It's a prosperous region.
But then right around the year 1050 CE, something dramatic and explosive happens.
The entire site is rapidly, intentionally, and radically reorganized.
It transforms overnight, historically speaking, from a populated agricultural zone into a deliberately planned, tightly controlled urban center.
It is a sudden explosion of top-down urban planning. They aren't just building more houses because more people are being born. They are terraforming the landscape to fit a preconceived blueprint.
They are imposing a grid, aligning structures to the cardinal directions, and launching monumental public works projects.
Yet we need to be incredibly scrupulous and honest with the numbers here, because whenever we talk about ancient populations, there is always a margin of error.
Right, we don't want to give you, the listener, a false sense of down to the single-digit precision.
The sources we are looking at emphasize that the scholarly consensus points to a peak population of somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 people residing at Cahokia around 1100 CE.
Now, some conservative estimates go as low as 6,000, and some aggressively high estimates based on different housing density models push it up to 40,000 or more.
But 15,000 to 20,000 is the commonly accepted central figure.
And that population is packed into a meticulously planned footprint covering roughly 6 square miles, featuring about 120 massive, purpose-built earthen mounds.
To give you a physical sense of that scale today, 109 of those mounds have been officially documented by archaeologists, and about 80 of them still survive right now within the protected historic site boundaries in Illinois.
What happened to the rest of them?
They were unfortunately destroyed, plowed over for modern farming, flattened for road building, or just swallowed by the general urban expansion of modern-day East St. Louis over the last century and a half.
That's shame. But let's bypass the smaller mounds for a second and fixate on the undisputed king of the site, the one that still absolutely dominates the landscape today.
Monks Mound.
Monks Mound. It is, without hyperbole, an architectural marvel of the ancient world.
It really is.
And as a quick aside, it gets its name not from the Mississippians who built it. We actually have no idea what they called their city, their monuments, or even themselves.
They didn't leave a written phonetic language,
Yeah.
which is a humbling reminder of how much human history is just silently lost to time.
It really is. We call it Monks Mound because a group of French Trappist monks actually lived on a smaller nearby mound and planted a garden on the terraces of this giant structure in the early 1800s.
But getting back to the structure itself,
Mm-hmm.
it is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas north of Mexico.
The footprint of the base of this mound is roughly 15 acres.
To put that in perspective for you, the base of Monks Mound is comparable in size to the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt.
And it rises in 4 distinct terraces to a height of about 100 feet.
And this is where we have to stop and interrogate the reality of the labor required.
Yes, let's talk about the labor.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture of human engineering, we have to brutally confront the technological constraints of North America at this time.
The Mississippians did not have draft animals. There were no horses, no oxen, no mules to pull carts.
And more fundamentally, they didn't have the wheel.
No wheels, no pulleys, no metal shovels, no mechanical advantages of any sort.
Which means every single ounce of that massive 100-foot-tall, 15-acre-wide mountain of earth was raised entirely by human muscle.
Let's do the math on that for a second because it's staggering. We are talking about roughly 22 million cubic feet of earth.
How does a society without wheels move 22 million cubic feet of dirt?
Basket by basket.
The archaeological evidence shows they use woven baskets that could hold roughly 50 to 60 pounds of dirt.
So imagine the physical reality of this. Human beings using stone hoes or wooden digging sticks, prying up the dense clay and soil of the floodplain.
They load it into a woven basket. They strap that basket to their back, likely using a tump line across their forehead to bear the weight.
And then they trudge across the plaza and walk up a steep, highly engineered slope, dump their 60 pounds of dirt, and walk back down to do it again.
Millions upon millions of times.
That's just, I can't even fathom it.
And it wasn't just a matter of piling up loose dirt until it got high enough.
Right, if you just pile up topsoil to a height of 100 feet, the first heavy Midwestern thunderstorm will turn it into a mudslide.
It will slump and collapse. The Cahokians engineered this. They understood soil mechanics.
They used different types of soil-dense clays, sandy soils, organic turf, and layered them deliberately.
They essentially built internal retaining walls out of clay to hold the structure together and manage internal water drainage.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the logistics. It's like trying to organize the construction of the Hoover Dam or a modern skyscraper, but you have to rely entirely on human sweat.
No diesel engines, no cranes, no software.
And think about the calories. You have thousands of people doing backbreaking manual labor for hours a day.
They are burning massive amounts of energy.
Which means your agricultural engine, your three sisters, has to be operating at peak efficiency just to feed the construction crews.
The immense social control required to organize that kind of labor is mind-boggling.
You don't just ask nicely for tens of thousands of people to spend years of their lives carrying dirt.
No, you have to have a deeply entrenched, highly structured social hierarchy. You need leaders who command absolute authority and a pervasive belief system that compels the population to participate.
That brings us to a crucial realization about urban design. The monumental architecture at Cahokia wasn't just about moving dirt to show off.
It wasn't just a make-work project.
It was about creating social order and sacred geography. The leaders of Cahokia were physically manifesting their political power and their cosmology directly onto the landscape.
They were building a theater for their authority.
Which brings us perfectly back to the Grand Plaza, that 50-acre space we stirred in at the very beginning of the deep dive.
The Grand Plaza is perhaps the most compelling physical evidence that Cahokia was a top-down, planned city, not an organic accretion of villages.
Why is that?
Because when geologists took core samples of the plaza area, they discovered that those 50 acres weren't naturally flat.
Really?
Yeah, the American bottom has a natural rolling topography of ridge and swale, slight elevations and depressions created by old river channels.
So they didn't just find a flat spot and build.
No, the Cahokians deliberately surveyed that 50-acre area, knocked down the ridges, and filled in the low swales with imported dirt.
Again, entirely by hand, carrying 60-pound baskets.
They moved hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of earth just to create a massive, perfectly flat, artificially leveled public square.
But why? I mean, why expend that astronomical amount of calories and labor just to have a flat field?
For mass gatherings, this plaza was the beating heart of their civilization. It was designed to host massive religious ceremonies, public feasts that redistributed food, and enormous games of chunky.
Okay, we have to talk about chunky because it's such a vivid detail of their daily life.
Chunky was a highly significant, culturally vital sport played across the Mississippian world, but Cahokia was its epicenter.
How did they play it?
It involved a player rolling a highly polished, heavy stone disc across the hard-packed earth of the plaza. As the stone rolled, other players would sprint alongside it and hurl long spears, trying to anticipate exactly where the stone would eventually stop, and aiming to have their spear land as close to that resting point as possible.
It sounds like a combination of bocce ball, javelin throwing, and a full-out sprint.
It was incredibly athletic, but more importantly, it was deeply ritualistic and drew massive crowds.
By creating this vast 50-acre space, the leaders could gather the entire population of the city, all 15,000 to 20,000 people, in one single place.
They could watch the chunky games, witness the religious rituals performed on the mounds above them, and feel a sense of overwhelming communal identity.
It was a tool for forging a shared civilization out of disparate farming families.
So they're actively ordering the physical space to control the population.
But if I'm reading these archaeological site records correctly, they weren't just ordering space, they were also attempting to order time.
Yes, and they did it with astonishing precision. Just to the west of Monks Mound, archaeologists have uncovered a series of large, deep post holes forming massive circles.
We now call this structure Woodhenge.
Woodhenge, like Stonehenge in England, but made of massive timber posts instead of stone blocks.
Precisely. Woodhenge was built and rebuilt multiple times between 900 and 1100 CE, with the circles growing larger and incorporating more posts with each iteration.
It consisted of perfectly spaced circles of massive red cedar trunks.
And it functioned as a highly sophisticated solar calendar.
Right. By standing at a central observation post and aligning the outer perimeter posts with the horizon, the religious leaders could track the exact movements of the sun throughout the year.
They could pinpoint the winter and summer solstices and the spring and fall equinoxes.
Let's put ourselves in their shoes. If you are an agricultural society and your literal survival, the survival of your children, the survival of the city is betting everything on the maize crop, knowing exactly when the seasons are changing is basically a superpower.
It is the ultimate superpower in an agrarian society.
Because you can't just guess when to plant. If you plant the seed stock too early and a late frost hits, the crop dies and you starve.
If you plant too late, the Midwest summer bakes the seedlings, or an early autumn frost kills them before harvest, and you starve.
You need precision.
And Woodhenge provided that precision. But think about how it functioned politically.
It allows the elite, the priests or the paramount chief standing on the mound, to say, the sun has reached this specific cedar post. The earth is waking up. It is time to plant.
Or, the sun has reached that post. The cold is coming. It is time to harvest.
They weren't just passively predicting the seasons. In the eyes of the populace gathering in the plaza below, these leaders were likely seen as controlling the sun, or at least intimately communicating with the divine forces that did.
So let's look at the incredible society we've built here. You have these religious and political leaders projecting absolute power.
They have ordered the space with these massive mounds in a 50-acre plaza, binding tens of thousands of citizens together through shared rituals, sports, and backbreaking communal labor.
They have ordered time itself with a giant solar calendar. They are running a highly efficient, incredibly complex civilization.
But we are still left staring at the elephant in the room. The geography.
The inescapable reality of the American bottom.
Right. You can have the best solar calendar in the world. You can have the most devoted citizens carrying all the baskets of dirt you want to build your mounds.
But none of that engineering stops the Mississippi River when it decides it's had enough, rises 30 feet, and violently floods the entire basin.
How did all this brilliant urban planning survive the river for 3 centuries? Did they just get astronomically lucky?
Well, as it turns out, they did have help, but it wasn't just a roll of the dice.
They had help from a very specific prolonged shift in the global climate.
And this is where the brilliant, hard data of modern geoscience comes in to finally solve the paradox.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because for a long time, archaeologists were just digging in the dirt mounds. They were looking at pottery shards, counting post holes, and trying to figure out the timeline of Cahokia purely from human artifacts.
But in 2015, a team led by a researcher named Samuel Munoz published a study in the journal PNAS that fundamentally changed how we read the history of this city.
And they didn't do it by looking at the human architecture. They did it by looking at the mud at the bottom of a nearby lake.
The methodology Munoz and his colleagues employed is a triumph of interdisciplinary science. Let's break down exactly what they did.
Right next to the Cahokia site, sitting in the floodplain, is a body of water called Horseshoe Lake.
Horseshoe Lake is what geologists call an oxbow lake.
Okay, let me picture this. An oxbow is basically an abandoned loop of the river, right?
Yes.
It forms when a river makes a really wide, sweeping U-turn, and eventually the water just cuts straight across the narrow neck of the U, leaving that old curved channel completely cut off from the main river current.
Exactly. So it becomes a freestanding, perfectly still lake in the shape of a horseshoe.
That makes sense. And because an oxbow lake is cut off from the daily churning current of the main river, the water inside it is very calm.
Which makes it a perfect geological trap.
Day after day, year after year, normal silt, dying algae, and organic matter slowly drift down through the still water and settle on the bottom.
It builds up a continuous, undisturbed accumulation of dark organic muck over thousands of years.
Like a slow-motion tape recorder of the environment.
Exactly. But when a major flood occurs, and we are talking about a catastrophic, society-altering flood, where the Mississippi River rises about 10 meters or roughly 33 feet above its normal baseline at St. Louis.
The river overtops its banks entirely.
The violent floodwaters surge outward across the American bottom and crash into these isolated oxbow lakes.
And when they do, they bring something with them. A massive amount of light-colored, silty clay scoured from the river basin.
When the floodwaters finally recede and the lake calms down, that heavy clay settles to the bottom, dropping a very distinct, very thick layer of light clay right on top of the dark, normal lakebed sediment.
It's like a geological barcode of ancient disasters.
Yes.
It's exactly like reading tree rings, but with mud. If you cut open a tree, a wide ring means a rainy year, a thin ring means a drought.
If you pull up the mud from the bottom of an oxbow lake, a thick white band of clay means a catastrophic 33-foot flood wiped out the American bottom.
You understand the mechanism perfectly. So, the Munoz research team went out onto Horseshoe Lake in boats.
They drove long, hollow aluminum and PVC tubes deep into the lakebed, extracting continuous cylinders of mud called sediment cores.
They pulled up thousands of years of layered history.
But in science, you have to verify your data to ensure you aren't just looking at a hyperlocal event like a small stream bank collapse.
Right, need confirmation.
So they traveled 120 miles downstream to another oxbow called Grassy Lake, and they pulled deep sediment cores from there as well to cross-check their findings.
So if there's a giant stripe of clay in Horseshoe Lake and the exact same giant stripe of clay 120 miles away in Grassy Lake at the exact same depth, you know you have a regional megaflood.
Precisely. By radiocarbon dating the tiny bits of organic matter, leaves, twigs, seeds trapped in the dark mud just above and below the clay layers, they could accurately date exactly when these massive floods occurred.
The Horseshoe Lake cores preserved a readable record of about 8 major flood events spanning nearly 2,000 years.
The downstream Grassy Lake cores perfectly confirmed the most recent 5 of those events.
And when Munoz's team mapped out the timeline hidden in these mud cores, a staggering, undeniable pattern emerged.
If I'm reading this Munoz study right, they didn't just find a few random floods. They found a massive, glaring dead zone of data.
A period where the river just mysteriously stopped flooding. What exactly did the timeline show?
The cores revealed that from roughly 300 CE to 600 CE, the Mississippi River was highly volatile.
Major 33-foot floods were a frequent occurrence.
thick layers of clay appeared repeatedly in the cores during that 300-year span.
Which means if you tried to build a city on the American bottom during those centuries, the river would have repeatedly, violently destroyed your crops, washed away your houses, and drowned your seed stock.
The environment was actively, hostilely opposed to a large-scale permanent settlement.
But then, right around 600 CE, the timeline drastically shifts. The big floods suddenly completely stop.
The thick clay layers vanish from the sediment cores.
For centuries, there is nothing but the slow, steady buildup of dark, organic mud.
The regional climate became noticeably drier, and the river simply went quiet.
And let's connect the dots here for you, because the timing is the key to the entire paradox of this city.
This multi-century lull in catastrophic flooding, this unprecedented merciful window of climate.
It perfectly, flawlessly overlays the entire rise and peak of Cahokia.
It is a breathtaking one-to-one correlation. Look at the timeline again. The catastrophic floods stop around 600 CE.
Almost immediately, indigenous people begin moving down from the bluffs and into the rich floodplain in greater numbers because it's finally safe to live there year-round.
Around 900 CE, right in the middle of this safe window, they confidently adopt intensive maize agriculture.
And then, at 1050 CE, with generation after generation having grown up experiencing nothing but a predictable, merciful river, the leaders ignite the Big Bang.
They rapidly reorganize into a sprawling, permanent metropolis.
This is such a profound realization about human nature. They built this massive, dense civilization based on the absolute, unquestioned assumption that the temporary 600-year lull in extreme weather they were experiencing was the permanent baseline reality of the environment.
They thought they had the river figured out.
They thought their prayers at Woodhenge were working. They built their city for the water, but they only succeeded because the water was taking a nap.
Cahokia is perhaps the clearest case on the North American continent of a great population center whose entire trajectory perfectly tracks the moods of a river.
They brilliantly leveraged the immense fertility of the American bottom during the single multi-century stretch in 2 millennia when the river was reliably cooperative.
It's like deciding to build a massive, sprawling, multi-million-dollar unelevated beach house in a known hurricane zone.
But you get away with it because you just happen to build it during a fluke 300-year period where, by some miracle of atmospheric currents, no hurricanes ever hit that specific stretch of coast.
You look like a genius to your neighbors. Your beach house is the envy of the world. You build additions. You throw massive parties.
But the storm is always out there. The mechanics of the ocean haven't changed.
And eventually, the atmospheric currents shift. The storm always returns.
Which brings us to the devastating turning point of this deep dive, the year 1200 CE.
Yes. According to the Munoz sediment cores, the multi-century merciful window finally slammed shut.
Right around 1200 CE, a massive, undeniably thick layer of light-colored clay appears once again in the dark mud of Horseshoe Lake.
The 33-foot flood fingerprint returns with a vengeance. The Mississippi River woke up.
Try to imagine the psychological horror of that moment. What happens when a society of 20,000 people who have engineered their entire civilization, their massive food storage systems, and their entire cosmological worldview around a quiet, obedient river suddenly wakes up to the deafening roar of water overtops the banks by 33 feet?
What does the archaeology show us?
Well, what the archaeological record shows is vital to understand because it subverts our expectations.
Yeah.
It does not show an overnight Hollywood-style apocalyptic collapse where the entire city is washed away in a single dramatic tsunami.
Human societies fight back. Instead, the archaeology shows the onset of a long, painful, and highly uneven contraction.
Right, and we need to be very careful here to maintain scientific honesty. We are not sensationalizing a giant flood wiped out the city in a day narrative.
That's too easy, and it's rarely how history actually works.
Exactly. The reality of urban decline is almost always multi-causal. Following that massive 1200 CE flood event, we see the population of Cahokia begin to visibly fall.
Over the next 150 years, the great centralized public works programs halt. They stop building massive new earthen mounds.
The sprawling neighborhoods slowly empty out. People begin to pack up and leave the American bottom in waves, seeking higher ground or returning to smaller, more decentralized ways of living.
By the period of 1350 to 1400 CE, this once thriving monumental metropolis is essentially deserted, a ghost town of earthen mountains.
Now, I want to step in and make sure we present the full scientific debate here.
We should.
The Munoz study is incredible. The sediment cores are hard data. And the timing of that 1200 CE flood returning perfectly tracking the beginning of the decline is spectacular.
But we have to acknowledge that another article published in that exact same journal, PNAS, by a different group of archaeologists, directly challenged the idea that the flood was the sole killer of the city.
The counter-argument literally centered on the fundamental scientific mantra: correlation does not equal causation.
And they are right to bring that up. It is a fundamental pillar of scientific inquiry. Just because two events happen at the same time, a flood and a population decline, does not automatically prove that one directly caused the other.
The archaeologists who published the critique pointed out that by the year 1200 CE, Cahokia was already a society on the brink, facing a massive, tangled web of intersecting crises.
Oh wait, it wasn't just the water. What else was going wrong?
Think about the environmental strain of having 20,000 people living in one dense location, burning wood fires every single day for a century and a half.
First, there is strong paleoclimatology evidence of severe regional drought occurring around this time.
Wait. So they are dealing with massive catastrophic floods and severe droughts in the same era.
Welcome to the brutal volatility of the American climate. A shifting climate regime often means extremes on both ends.
Drought would have devastated the maize crops just as thoroughly as a flood, starving the city.
In addition to climate swings, there was the massive, self-inflicted wound of deforestation. The Cahokians had clear-cut enormous swaths of the surrounding upland forests.
They needed the timber to build thousands of houses, to fuel their thousands of continuous cooking and pottery fires, and to construct the monumental palisade we'll discuss in a moment.
And when you clear-cut forests around a river basin, you remove the roots that hold the soil together.
Which leads to massive soil erosion, washing away your topsoil, and leading to agricultural exhaustion.
Precisely. You have less food, fewer trees, and eroding soil. And when you combine environmental degradation with a massive population, you get intense political fragmentation and social unrest.
The centralized authority that confidently orchestrated the Big Bang of 1050 CE, the elites who could command people to build Monks Mound, seemed to have been fracturing.
People were likely losing faith in the leadership.
So, if we look at it comprehensively, the return of the catastrophic floods around 1200 CE was likely a massive, perhaps insurmountable stressor.
It was the match thrown into a powder keg of environmental and social issues that had been building for decades.
But we shouldn't view the river as the singular, solitary villain of the story.
Not only that, but viewing the river as the only threat ignores one of the most glaring pieces of evidence at the site.
The flood was a brutal shock to a system that was already reaching the absolute limits of its sustainability.
But to truly understand the sheer amount of stress and terror this society was under during its slow decline, we have to look at another massive piece of monumental architecture.
Because the river returning wasn't the only thing the Cahokians were terrified of.
And this is the part of the story that I find the most fascinating, because it completely throws a wrench into any simplistic, environmentally deterministic narrative.
Because if you want to argue that the people of Cahokia were only worried about the water, that their entire worldview was just managing the river, and that they built these massive mounds solely as life rafts or flood refuges, there is a giant physical contradiction built right into the heart of the city that proves otherwise.
You are talking about the palisade.
The palisade. Let's look at the timeline.
Around 1175 to 1200 CE, which, mind you, is exactly the same time the massive floods are returning, the droughts are hitting, and the city is beginning to contract. The leaders of Cahokia ordered the construction of a massive 2-mile-long defensive wall.
And this wasn't a simple picket fence. This was a staggering undertaking of military engineering.
They dug a deep trench enclosing the entire central precinct of the city. This central walled-off area protected Monks Mound, the Grand Plaza, and the elite residential compounds.
They harvested tens of thousands of massive oak and hickory logs, stripped them, and planted them upright in the trench, creating a towering, impenetrable wooden stockade.
And they didn't just build it once. As the logs inevitably rotted in the humid floodplain environment, the archaeological record shows they completely rebuilt this massive 2-mile wall multiple times over the ensuing decades.
Let's focus on the architecture of that wall because it reveals intent. When you look at the layout of the palisade, it features these regular projections sticking out from the main line of the wall. They built bastions.
Yes, bastions are the crucial detail here.
For you listening, let's explain what a bastion is mechanically. A bastion is a section of a defensive wall that juts outward, forming a square or a semicircle.
It allows the defenders to stand inside that projecting box and shoot arrows parallel down the length of the main wall.
So if an attacker runs up to the wall with a ladder or a torch, Defenders in the bastions on either side can catch them in a deadly crossfire.
It is a highly specific, highly advanced piece of military technology.
And here is the glaring, undeniable logical deduction we have to make from that architecture. You do not build a 2-mile-long wooden wall with projecting bastions to fight a river.
Exactly. It's like bringing a shotgun to a hurricane. It makes absolutely no sense.
A floodwater doesn't care about crossfire. A floodwater doesn't try to climb a wall. It seeps through the cracks and goes under it.
A bastion wall is a piece of technology designed specifically and exclusively for killing other human beings.
Which serves as the most honest counterweight to the purely environmental narrative.
The presence of the bastion palisade proves without a shadow of a doubt that the Cahokians possessed a deep, intense, and highly mobilizing fear of other people.
It highlights this profound, almost tragic tension in the archaeological record. It's a tale of two cities.
On one hand, you have the Grand Plaza and Monks Mound, built around 1050 CE. These are structures designed to project supreme confidence, ritual power, and social unity.
They are broadcasting an open message to the world. Come here, trade with us, worship with us. We are the masters of this landscape.
But on the other hand, just a century or so later, they are frantically clear-cutting their remaining forests to build a massive fortress wall that violently separates the elite center from the rest of their own city.
They are terrified, paralyzed by defensive insecurity.
It paints a picture of a society that is rapidly turning inward, a leadership that is desperately trying to protect itself.
And we don't know exactly who they were fighting. Perhaps they were defending against external raiding parties from rival chiefdoms who were also suffering from the climate shifts.
Or perhaps even more terrifyingly, they were walling themselves off to protect against internal uprisings by their own increasingly stressed, starving, and disillusioned population.
When resources become scarce, whether due to drought, soil exhaustion, or massive floods ruining the harvest, social cohesion is usually the very first casualty.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces on the board. The elites are walled in, they are terrified of attacks from humans, and the river is waking up, bringing massive floods.
This brings up a really crucial logical problem that I want to pose directly to you, the listener. It's a math problem regarding the sheer utility of these mounds during a crisis.
If we entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, the Cahokians originally built these massive earthen platform mounds as life rafts, as artificial high ground to escape the floodwaters when the river breached the banks, could they actually save the city?
It's an important hypothesis to test. Let's run the numbers because mathematics is unsparing here. The apex of the city's population is estimated at 15,000 to 20,000 people.
Now, let's look at the available high ground. We'll take Monks Mound, the absolute largest structure in the city. The flat summit of Monks Mound is roughly an acre or two in size.
The other 100-plus mounds scattered around the city have significantly, dramatically smaller summits. Many are just big enough for a single building.
Right. Keep going.
If a catastrophic 33-foot flood surges across the American bottom, the water covers everything. The plazas, the agricultural fields, the residential neighborhoods.
If the entire population panics and runs for the artificial high ground, if you took every single man, woman, and child, all 20,000 of them plus their dogs, their essential tools, their fires, and critically, the massive bulky stores of seed corn required to restart their agriculture the next year.
You absolutely cannot fit them all on top of those mounds.
It's a physical, geometric impossibility.
If you try to pack 20,000 panicked people onto a few acres of elevated dirt, you would have thousands of people pushed off the steep edges into the raging floodwaters.
It's a horrifying, chaotic image, but mathematically, the mounds simply do not work as a citywide lifeboat.
The logical conclusion is stark and unavoidable. Whatever these mounds were protecting from the water, whatever the ultimate purpose of this high ground was during a crisis, it was not designed to save the entire population.
It was not a lifeboat for everyone.
No, if it was a lifeboat, it was an incredibly exclusive one.
Perhaps it was meant only for the ruling elite, the religious leadership, or perhaps the most vital resource of all the seed stock itself, guarded by the elites.
But the vast majority of the citizenry, the people who carried the baskets of dirt to build those mounds, would have been left down below to face the water on their own.
Which perfectly encapsulates the incredible unresolved journey we've taken in this deep dive.
We started with a staggering paradox. A sprawling, complex, mathematically planned metropolis of tens of thousands, intentionally planted on one of the most dangerous, flood-prone pieces of real estate in North America.
A city that thrived, expanded, and achieved unimaginable feats of hand-built engineering, solar astronomy, and social organization, entirely because it was fortunate enough to be born during a fluke 600-year window of climatic mercy.
Only to eventually find itself walled off behind massive wooden bastions in fear, fracturing under environmental and social stress, and ultimately abandoned when the temporary atmospheric lull ended, the rains returned, and the mighty Mississippi River woke up to claim its basin.
Now, I want to be very explicit here as we wrap up this specific exploration. We have laid out the vessel today. We've explored the paradox of the location.
But we are not going to answer the ultimate mechanical questions of their survival today.
We aren't going to tell you exactly how the engineers of Cahokia managed the groundwater seepage, how they kept their crucial seed reserves dry year to year, or what exactly happened on top of those highly restricted mound summits when the floodwaters finally crested the palisade walls.
Those specific, intricate, microscopic puzzles of survival engineering and food storage are exactly what we will be unpacking in our future deep dives into these sources.
Today was about establishing the massive city itself, the incredible ambition of its people, and the precarious environmental tightrope it walked.
But before we officially sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've discussed today about risk, reward, and human assumption, but brings it uncomfortably close to home.
Consider the fundamental vulnerability of what we've seen here. The brilliant, powerful, mathematically minded leaders of Cahokia built an incredibly complex civilization based on a deeply flawed assumption.
They assumed that a temporary, multi-century lull in extreme weather was the permanent baseline of reality.
They built their homes, their infrastructure, their religious calendars, and their agricultural systems for a quiet river.
And when the environment inevitably snapped back to its historical violent norm, their beautifully engineered systems simply couldn't hold.
So I want you to look around at the world we live in today. Look at the sprawling coastal megacities we've built right on the edge of the oceans.
Look at the massive, water-intensive agricultural zones we've planted in the middle of arid deserts. Look at the power grids and the supply chains we rely on every single day.
And ask yourself, what temporary environmental lulls are we currently mistaking for permanent reality?
And when the timeline inevitably shifts and the water returns, will our systems hold any better than the great earthen mounds of the American bottom?